Alright, everyone. Well, tonight is, hopefully this episode will be a lot more of a breather because I have all the time in the world because my mom is out of town, so I'm by myself for the next few days, and I think tonight's episode, really was an episode that, honestly, I didn't really think much of. I didn't think it was great, but I didn't think it was bad. But rewatching the episode again, this episode seems a lot more relevant in 2023, and I think maybe this is an episode that I think everybody should probably keep in mind, so let's just get into it. This is a health of information. So this episode starts out in a pretty looking swamp where we see Zecora helping out Fluttershy. So yes, back-to-back episodes of Zecora, that's definitely nice. As we see Zecora basically trying to reach into the swamp for some moss.
I don't know. It's a pretty big pack. Maybe enough to fill up this sack? Oh my, you're rubbing off on me, Zecora.
Her rhyming is adorable. But Zecora ends up falling into the moss, but...
No need to fret. I only got wet. At least now I can easily grab all the crisscross moss there is to be had.
But then Zecora comes across a weird blue and orange spotted flower and gets sprayed with pollen where...
What's happening to you?
Honestly, it's hard to tell, but suddenly I don't feel so well. Ooh, that's not good.
Yeah. This especially is more prevalent where, after the intro, Fluttershy takes Zecora to the doctor to examine and figure out what is going on with her. As we hear a drum beat for her heartbeat, so that's a red flag. And she ends up coughing bubbles, which is another thing.
We're looking for any color other than red.
Phew.
Wow.
Just as I thought. I'm afraid you have a very rare disease called swamp fever.
Tell me, doctor, what should I do? I've never heard of swamp fever, mind you.
Well, I guess considering that, number one, it's obviously a rare disease, and on top of that, Zecora isn't around Ponyville to know these kind of things. But yeah, this is something that's kind of interesting to know, and it all stems from that blue and orange spotted flower, so we already know the conflict of the episode right out of the gate. So the doctor then proceeds to explain the symptoms and what the thing is about swamp fever.
Very little is known about the disease.
Well, if it's very little known, then how come you know about the name?
Except, of course, its symptoms. Change of coat, coughing bubbles, shock sneezing.
Okay, so shock sneezing's a red.
Confusion, and the last stage, the afflicted turn into the very trees that drop the disease-spreading flower.
Okay, so that's really dark. So essentially, basically this swamp fever can turn a living thing into a tree, essentially killing them. And I thought Kurama's plant from Yu Yu Hakusho was deadly. If this was a rare disease that has been existing for a while, even if it's been rare, that's been around for years, and they know about it, then that means the swamp fever possibly has a pretty high body count. So, that's cheery to note.
Is there anything that can be done for such a terrible conundrum?
A cure has yet to be discovered.
So essentially the swamp fever is essentially Equestria's version of cancer.
I'm sorry, Zecora. It's a lot to take in. I'll leave you two to discuss.
Discussed by running away and possibly facing what appears to be a rare but terminal disease. So we're starting out grim. Friendship is magic. So Fluttershy feels incredibly guilty and tries to basically find out where to find Mage and goes to Twilight's castle to try to find some information and fill her in on what's going on.
Delicious. Score has swamp fever and there's no cure and it's all my fault and the only pony who can cure is the mystical mask and I need your help to find her.
So what'd you pick?
So they try to go through the library to try to find books, but they can't seem to find anything on the mystical mask, no matter how many books they try to look through.
Check the unabridged versions?
Yes, and the books on rare diseases, the books on rare plants, and the entire section on bog habitation.
Well, we might have to look through every book in the entire library, but I know we'll figure it out.
Oh.
And that's exactly what they do, but to no avail. It gets to the point where Twilight is exhausted and...
Of course. No problem. I'll grab you a pillow and...
Oh, no. I meant you should
Yeah, so we see that Fluttershy is essentially, while Twilight wants to go and rest, Fluttershy wants to continue working on her own.
Cora is here.
I understand how you feel, but I still think we'd have more luck if we tried again in the morning. Just promise me you'll take a break soon.
And by the next morning, Fluttershy does eventually figure it out, but she didn't get any sleep at all, but explains what happened.
The book of masks with another book on ancient equestrian humors, then a third book to translate it all from Old Ponish, and there it was. Sakura was right. The mystical mask wasn't just a legend. The mystical mask was Mage Medow Brook.
Alright, so, couple things to know. So, first of all, you may have noticed that this isn't an episode that is focusing more on Fluttershy's confidence. It's not that type of episode. We see Fluttershy immediately taking action, trying to take responsibilities for her actions of what's happening to Sakura, and essentially trying to help her as best as she's able to, and she's really sticking up for it. And the second thing, here we have yet another legend that's introduced in this season. So, yeah. So, considering that this is now 5 legends in the past 3 or 4 episodes, I feel like that this is kind of leading to something bigger.
The ancient sorceress from Hayseed Swamp? We studied her at Celestia School. Are you sure?
Absolutely. Mage Medow Brook wasn't just a sorceress. She was also a healer. Back then, healers wore masks so they wouldn't get sick themselves.
Fluttershy,
Of course. Every second we spend waiting is a second Sakura is coughing bubbles.
but Fluttershy, you haven't slept, and that's a long journey.
There's no use trying to talk me out of this, Twilight. We've got no time to waste.
Can we at least grab some breakfast?
I passed cauliflower bites.
Aw, no sweet potato muffins? I, ate them all.
So yeah. So this is definitely already an interesting plot point to know, considering that Fluttershy is literally going out of her way to try to basically take hold of her responsibilities at the cost of not having any sleep. So then they stop by Sakura, where, believe it or not, she forgets a rhyme.
Oh no.
So she's basically getting worse. And even sneezing lightning is one of the symptoms. And I really like how Twilight doesn't really bat an eye to that.
Wait, Fluttershy.
But we start to see signs of Fluttershy's lack of sleep actually starting to come back, where before they even leave, she accidentally bumps into the door without even opening it. Yeah, kind of showing what happens where if you don't sleep at all, you become really tired and start to lose focus. So now, we have another instance of world building as we get to a pretty nice swamp location to find the home of Mage Medow Brook.
Yes, this has to be it. It's just like...
Or we could try the handle.
It really blends in with the bark.
Yeah, but I think this is kind of like the signs of what happens when you don't get enough sleep. And when you're so focused on a task and you don't get enough sleep, it basically affects you mentally, and we start to see the signs of that in Fluttershy.
A fever.
So then we basically see inside the tree where basically we get this funny exchange where we meet this character creepily rocking back and forth inside the tree.
Y'all can stop screaming now. Didn't mean to scare you. I do that a lot.
Scare ponies or rock creepily in the dark?
Oh, God, that's hilarious.
Well, both, I suppose.
And that's an even better exchange.
Name's Cattail. Pleased to meet you.
Likewise. May I ask, why are you in Mage Medow Brook's home?
Oh, I take care of the place. I ain't much of a cleaner, but from what I hear, my kin wasn't either,
So yes, so this character, Cattail, is essentially a descendant of Mage Medow Brook and has likely taken care of the place for likely years. So basically he allows Twilight and Fluttershy to research more on Mage Medow Brook's home life, and while we do get some pretty funny exchanges, we actually get to see what Mage Medow Brook like as Fluttershy reads a journal entry.
And I finally got it right.
So yeah, I think you could probably tell the signs that I feel like that basically the way that the ponies in this area talk in both Mage Medow Brook and Catfish, it is essentially sort of like New Orleans accents. Did you know what I mean? But essentially we get to see that Mage Medow Brook was actually a successful healer and got her own mask. We also see that swamp fever existed around that time, and her mother ended up catching sick along with a bunch of other ponies.
Fever spread like wildfire.
And considering how in one shot how many ponies are sick, this kind of leads back to my earlier statement where it seems like that this swamp fever would theoretically have a dangerously high body count. And a very gruesome one, I might add, even if it is just for kids. And we see the entry where essentially we see another kind of creature called flash bees, where the poison from the swamp fever flower doesn't affect them. And we see that Mage Medow Brook is also a badass who tries to get at the honey, but we find out that the flash bees are incredibly aggressive. And off-screen we see that she was able to get the honey that essentially cures her mother and every pony else. And then, after Fluttershy finishes reading...
Oh no! I caught swamp fever!
Yeah, so Fluttershy has swamp fever. Okay, so far, this episode has been really legitimately good from what we've seen so far. There's really this is just yet another episode where there's really nothing to complain with. The story is engaging. You really feel Fluttershy's urgency and wanting to hurry up when it's coming to the cost of, her not sleeping, and then learning about the backstory more interesting from a journal entry about Mage Medow Brook, yet another legend that could lead to something greater. And then the episode hits smack dab into the wall of the plot hole. And the reason why I say this is because it makes you wonder, how exactly did Fluttershy catch swamp fever? I've seen this episode twice now, and I'm not sure how it's never really explained how swamp fever is passed on from one person to another. Like, I'm not sure if this is kind of like COVID or anything like that, because the episode never really gives an indication or even some kind of earlier sign when Fluttershy got infected with swamp fever. I guess maybe it was probably around when she was with Sakura that was either like coughing bubbles, either in the doctor's office or sneezing lightning. That could have been one thing. But we never saw any earlier signs of how the disease kind of takes over, or for how long, in fact, because when Sakura got infected, she immediately came down with it. Same with Meadowbrook's mother. But it seems like that Fluttershy, if it's led to be believed that Fluttershy either got the disease either a full 24 hours ago and it's starting to kick in, or even before that, which would have been a few days. So this episode leaves a gigantic plot hole about the swamp fever and how much time it takes when someone gets infected. So realizing now that she's infected, she tries to cover up Catfish and Twilight with basically masks.
Or these are necessary.
Yes! I won't risk infecting you or Cattail.
What you can't risk is getting any sicker. If you don't rest, your symptoms will only get worse.
Alright, so first of all, the pony's name is Cattail, so I'm basically an idiot. But this leads to basically kind of another thing, where it's great that we see Fluttershy trying to step out of her comfort zone, and we see her pushing herself so hard, even to the point of sickness and exhaustion. But Twilight brings up the point that if you don't try to rest and relax, you won't feel better, whether you're sick or not sick. And I think this is kind of a very prudent point, especially in 2023, where everybody is more focused on mental health nowadays. Especially given more recently, considering of the recent suicides of the dancer Twitch and the actor of Tommy from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Jason David Frank, both committing suicide. So this idea of not only just physical health, but also mostly on mental health and how hard you push yourselves, this is a lot more relevant watching this episode in 2023. So despite Cattail and Twilight insisting that Fluttershy should get some rest, Fluttershy insists that she has to go talk to the Flash Bees.
Too dangerous, Twilight. Besides, I've already gotten one friend hurt. Won't let it happen to another. Okay, Fluttershy, you can.
So despite being sick and potentially really starting to be on the verge of immediately dying, she heads to the hive of the Flash Bees where she tries to talk to them.
Hello, Flash Bees. I was hoping I could get some of your honey.
Get that motherfucker!
Yeah, so the Flash Bees are not exactly friendly. And believe it or not, even when Fluttershy gives them the stare, they do not budge. So yes, we basically come across a set of animals that are not intimidated by Fluttershy's stare. But with Fluttershy pushing herself too hard, she ends up spiraling out of control, and we get a realistic scene of how everything that she sees is all of a sudden spinning, and she ends up passing out.
Goodness gracious.
Actually, you've been asleep for 3 days.
Yeah, so Fluttershy has been out for 3 days after passing out. During that time, Cattail and Twilight had already tried everything to try to get the honey, but to no avail. Well, Cattail even informs that Zecora then starts to sprout leaves during that time.
I can't even use magic to calm them down. We'll have to find another way to get the honey.
We've tried everything from disguises to things I won't even speak of.
He's been through a lot these past 3 days.
Wait. Guys.
But even despite this, Fluttershy then gets to see one of the Flash Bees comes in and see them basically hung on to basically the mask that we saw from Medow Brook's journal entry in Flashback, which then gives Fluttershy an idea.
This is how Medow Brook got the honey from the Flash Bees.
She threw a mask at them? I wouldn't recommend that.
No, the male bees aren't aggressive around the queen bee, and this mask has the same stripes that she does.
Fluttershy, that's brilliant!
Whoa!
There's no time to waste.
Hooves crossed.
So Fluttershy then goes up and wears the mask, as we basically see, just as Fluttershy predicted, the bees are not as aggressive, and Fluttershy is able to get the honey.
It's working.
And thus she is able to cure herself, and they race back to Zecora and is able to cure her, as we do see leaves and tree growing. So, again, very grim to think about the swamp fever.
I think she is cured now, Fluttershy.
Oh, I do feel fine, and this honey is divine.
Oh, you're rhyming again. Welcome back, my friend.
Thank you, Fluttershy, for all you endure. If not for you, I would not be cured.
Oh, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have been sick in the first place.
Regret is not what you should feel, because on this journey, you've learned a great deal.
That's true. You certainly learned that if you don't take care of yourself, you won't be able to take care of any pony else.
And that moral, let's think about that. As I mentioned earlier, because we're now in the age where we now have to start thinking about not only our physical health, but we are also focusing more on our mental health too. This episode is a lot more relevant to watch in 2023 when we have to start thinking about our mental health. And considering what people have to go through with depression, and worst case scenario leads to suicide, and as I said, with the most recent suicides of both Twitch and Jason David Frank, it's very important to remember how important your mental health is. And if you can't find a way to step back from doing something that you love, or whether you're working or whatever, if you don't take the time to step back and take a day to yourself to take care of yourself, you won't be able to help others. So this moral is a lot more relevant in 2023, watching this episode now. And I think this is something that I think kids should be able to understand. Because we don't know what everybody is thinking, and there could be a suicide happening right at this moment because they were so busy helping other people that they haven't took the time to take care of themselves.
In fact, if I had rested, like Twilight suggested all along, maybe I would have thought to use Meadowbrook's mask sooner.
Yeah. And that's another thing when you don't get enough sleep. Because when you're so focused on a task, but you don't take the time to rest and recover and not think about it too much, you'll just keep working yourself to the bone, and you'll just wear yourself out. I know this because there was an incident at work where I was freaking myself out. When Wednesday, I usually don't start till 10 because the company gives us wellness days and they usually let us sleep in an hour in. But because there was an incident that happened that just really freaked me out, I started working at 8:20 on that day because I was so focused on figuring out what is it that I'm supposed to get right, what is it that I'm supposed to want. I was freaking myself out and just worrying about it that I didn't even take the time to take that full hour off like I've done every other Wednesday. Like I said, this episode's moral is more relatable and more relevant now in 2023. And thus the episode ends when the doctor ends up catching swamp fever too.
Please tell me you found the cure.
Yeah, amazingly the doctor doesn't know the cure, but the doctor ends up getting the disease too. So in the words of Bender,
Now that is irony.
And the episode just ends with the doctor just coughing bubbles and seizing lightning, but I'm assuming he gets the cure off screen, and that's the end. So that was a help of information, and by God, this episode was better than I thought it was. This was probably one of the most engaging episodes I've seen in a while. There's immediate conflict if you recognize what's going on. We see Fluttershy's tremendous growth over the course of the series, and it's not focusing on her standing up for herself, but actually trying to focus on her own problems that she believes that she caused, but at the cost of her mental health. The legend of Mage Medow Brook is very interesting. The swamp fever, while it gives us a gigantic plot hole in the episode, is very grim and really dark when you think about it. And you could definitely feel the urgency going on in the episode. And other than that one gigantic plot hole, there wasn't really anything that I could really critique about the episode. And the moral is really fantastic, especially if you watch this episode in 2023, where many people have to prioritize their mental health. This is something that I think kids would be able to understand, and it's important to understand that sometimes you need to take a rest, whether you're sick or not, where you need to take the time to rest, recuperate, and recover in order to get anything done so you won't have to think about it too much. So, I think really as a whole, I think a health of information, I think it's an A-. The only reason I really don't give it an A or an A+, is because of that one gigantic plot hole of how much time the swamp fever takes to take over some pony where they start feeling symptoms. But other than that, this episode was a lot better than I gave it credit for. So, yeah, A Health of Information is an A-. Alright, so with that, we are now down to 6 episodes of Season 7. And next time we are looking at Marks and Recreation. I am so ready for next episode. You want to know why? Because even though Daring Done might hold the title right now, this was an episode when I first watched, I hated every single fiber of it. So next time, we're going to look at Marks and Recreations. It may change my mind when compared to Daring Done, but as I see it, next time it's Marks and Recreation, what I consider to be the worst episode of Season 7. And I have a lot to say about it. I've been saving this up for 7 episodes after that one-off line from Apple Bloom, but I'll save it when we get to it. So like I said, next time, it's Marks and Recreations, what I consider to be potentially the worst episode of Season 7. See you guys then. Bye.